Okay. Final episode before we hit episode 500. Pretty interesting place to be. And all that I can say this episode is about is two B's. Now, normally, people would assume that that's stuff like, I don't know, booze and broads, bitches and bottles, which is more or less the same thing, but this episode is about more than that. It's actually about beliefs and betrayals. Okay, betrayal is a little bit of a heavier word. It's more like infidelity, but I figured the two B's thing would probably make a little bit more sense, but all in all, that's more or less what it's about, but more or less the typical relationship and sex shit that I usually like to talk about. Although, before I can get into any of that, I want to start by talking about something that I honestly believe is a bit of a hoodwink or just some level of BS, because this is a lot harder to believe than most things, and I honestly think that there might be something deeper that's hidden behind it. Now, the story is there's a priest, or former priest if you can call him that, who was accused of spending over $40,000 of church money on Candy Crush. Over $40,000 on Candy Crush. I don't know. Something seems a little bit fishy here. Like, first of all, what the fuck are you spending money on Candy Crush for? But still, bigger question. How the fuck do you end up spending over $40,000 on Candy Crush? Of all things, Candy Crush. Don't you see that there's something a little bit odd here?
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Because, when you think about the amounts of money that people spend on in-game purchases and in-app purchases, yes, $40,000 may seem like a lot, but there's some people who've spent way more than that. And, that makes sense. But over 40,000 on just Candy Crush, I don't know, that's setting off a bunch of certain bells in my head. But you know what, let me just read the story because it wasn't all that long. It was a simple caption on IG which stated, and I quote, "Former priest Lawrence Kozak of St. Thomas More Parish in Pottstown, Pennsylvania faces criminal charges for allegedly misappropriating over $214,000 of church funds. He spent nearly $44,000 on App Store transactions for virtual slot machines and games like Mario Kart and Candy Crush. The priest paid off part of the parish credit card balance and sent an apology letter and an $8,000 check to his successor. He is charged with theft and unauthorized access to a device." End quote. Okay, now that we've included a little bit of, virtual slot machines, maybe you can see that he spent over $40,000 there. That makes sense. If you want to say that he spent a bunch of money on Mario Kart and Candy Crush, that raises some questions, because anything that's in the thousands of dollars just on those apps seems like a little much by anyone's standards. Even games where proper gamers spend a shit ton of money on stuff like DLCs and certain in-app purchases like Fortnite, Call of Duty and shit like that, you never hear them getting into the thousands of dollars. But you're telling me that Candy Crush, a simple pastime game, made a priest all of a sudden spend $40,000? I don't know. Considering that there was that whole story about Amazon and selling products at certain exorbitant prices, and it was secretly a thing where people are doing child trafficking, and considering that it's a priest, I know it's going to be classified as stereotyping, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Mario Kart and the Candy Crush aren't the original versions, and there's probably secret payments for I don't know, some version of child pornography or some shit that this guy is checking out. Because honestly, spending that much money on this, I don't even care much about the money. The church has been eating up money under different things for different reasons. But this is a little bit odd. Although, fortunately, considering that I am neither Catholic nor do I give a damn about priests, I can leave this as is and move it on to the podcast itself, which I should have started in a much better way with a little bit more pizzazz and a little less conspiracy theoryism and maybe an instrumental, kind of like when I try to do it when I say, "Welcome to the Breaktime Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit." The man on the mic is a man who sees a priest and does not see someone that can pray for him, but rather someone that can pray on him. If he was 10 years old, or 9. He's a man who believes that astrology should have been the study of ass. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. honestly, like, if you're telling me that the whole priest story doesn't sound a little bit sus to you, I don't know. Maybe it's just a me thing, but I feel like money being stolen or misappropriated in the Catholic Church, considering how rampant it tends to happen in a lot of other places, I feel like it shouldn't have warranted this sort of punishment where the guy ended up being kicked out. Like, I feel like they probably found out that he was doing some nasty, sneaky shit, and they decided to throw it in with the misappropriation of funds, and they just used that to kick him out. But all in all, church money and pedos aside, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you listen all the way till the end of the episode, because, I have like a bunch of stuff that I need to talk about, and, I think they're actually pretty good. And considering that this is a Friday episode, I usually like to dive into the wonderful world of X and look at some of the things that people say, break them down a little bit, see if they're speaking sense, nonsense, or somewhere in between. And usually I appreciate it whenever my people send me the tweets that they'd like me to discuss, whether it's on X, whether it's on Facebook or IG, and I'll explain how in a second, because it's a very simple drill, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal X handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly on Facebook or on IG. If it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, or it ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to is @thebreaktime_podcast on IG or @thebreaktime_podcast on Facebook. The DMs are always open, and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, I have a couple of tweets that I need to break down, but before I can get into any of that, I first want to talk about something that I feel is a bit of a controversial topic. Not necessarily because it's something that has split views or anything, it's just that it's something that a lot of people believe that I am very skeptical about, very critical about, and it does end up driving some people the other way, that I am actually critical and or skeptical about it. And that is the concept of soul ties. Now, I have spoken about it before on this podcast a bunch of different times on a couple of different episodes about how I find the concept of soul ties and exchanging spirits and them to be a little bit more mumbo jumbo than real, not because I do not believe in it, but for other reasons. Now, I am going to play a clip because someone else apparently seems to share the same opinions as me to some degree on this entire thing, and it was a babe and she ended up being clowned for it online, but I am going to play the clip either way, so without further ado...
Do you believe in soul ties? No. I feel like that's just some made up bullshit that everybody just used to try to latch on to people. No, fuck all that soul tie shit. Once we done, we done. I don't care if you nut at me. We not connected by the soul. You do some wrong shit, you can kiss my ass and you can get the fuck on. We's not tied by nothing.
Okay, I actually didn't expect that it would have that much vulgar language, but that's sort of besides the point. Now, the whole concept of soul ties, she classifies it as bullshit, which I don't fully do. I don't say that it's like bullshit. I just say that I do not have enough evidence to support the entire thing, but I do have some evidence to deny it. Not necessarily in that, they can't exist. It's just the way people use the concept of soul ties and spiritual exchanges and shit just drives me up the wall. And it's mainly because of how people are super one-sided about the entire thing. And I noticed this in the comments quite a bit because I looked through a bunch of the comments under this post where this babe was saying all the things that she was saying, and people were busy talking about how, someone's got your soul, that's why you're so bitter, or you must have a lot of souls in you, or some shit like that, you must have tied with a lot of people, blah blah. And the entire time I'm like, so you guys aren't actually questioning if that shit might actually be wrong. Because when you kind of think about it, most times whenever people are talking about soul ties, it's only ever in the negative. Actually, every single time I hear people busy talking about soul ties, it's usually in the negative. And while most people who talk about soul ties claim to know about soul ties, most of them do not know anything about soul ties besides the fact that when people have sex, soul ties are supposedly made or exchanged or some shit. And yet the origins of soul ties, the origins of spiritual exchanges aren't even based off of whatever religion they're following, of which a big chunk of them are actually Christians. And there is nothing in the Bible, there is nothing around Christianity that actually speaks on soul ties. So even whatever they're saying about soul ties isn't based off of whatever religion that they are following. So Soul ties, in essence, aren't actually too far off from star signs, which a lot of people follow and like to believe in, yet it doesn't have any particular religious backing to whatever religion that people are following. Now, don't get me wrong, like, you can follow one religion, you can read the Bible, but it doesn't mean that you have to follow everything in it. You can pick some aspects of that and believe in that and believe in something else. Like, you're a human being and you can do whatever the fuck you want. But still, at the end of it, you kind of have to ask if people are believing in this shit because it's a trendy thing, or because it gives an explanation to something that they feel, something that they had some idea of but they couldn't quite put their finger on it, or it's some people's way of trying to explain the world around them, or at least the world around sex, or it's just a sexual deterrent that is supposedly supposed to work because religion hasn't been doing a particularly good job of late. Like Christianity, the whole sex before marriage thing, it's sort of not working right now, at least for a vast chunk of Christians. And with Muslims, I really can't speak on that. I don't know much about the religion, but there's a lot of people that are being sexually active premaritally. So having the concept of soul ties probably works as a pretty good sexual deterrent against having sex before marriage, or sleeping around with multiple individuals. But all in all, what I'm trying to say is, because most people can't even fully understand or explain or even dispute the concept of soul ties, I find it very hard to believe, and I don't think that people should be shunned or looked at like, they're suddenly like hurt people or damaged people if they feel that they also don't believe in the concept of soul ties. At the end of the day, it's a belief system that is very weak. It does not have any supporting evidence besides a bunch of shit that people supposedly feel, and honestly, it becomes very hard to substantiate, which is why, like I said initially, I think that there's a bit of bullshit around this. But then again, it could just be me, but I am going to leave it at that and move it on to the tweets because that is what we came here for. So, on to our very first tweet of this episode. So the tweet is from a woman who says, and I quote, "If you've dated someone as an adult who had their first relationship with you, you'll understand why them younger relationships are important. Dating people who never had a serious relationship before you is the absolute worst." End quote. Okay, so this does carry some level of merit. Actually, I feel like it does carry quite some merit. It's just, for the most part, it seems like Shorty is bitter and she's not willing to give grace to someone who doesn't have experience in relationships. But I can also get how, at a certain age, we expect that the person that we want to take as our partner, or the person that we're getting into some sort of a commitment with, has some sort of experience in relationships to know how to treat you, to know how to be in a relationship and how to be a good partner. It's something that we expect of people, but unfortunately, it's not something that too many people will have access to. There's a lot of people nowadays that haven't been in relationships at all. Like, there's people who haven't even been intimate with people at all, and they are in their late 20s, some even in their 30s. Hell, there's people who are even in their 40s and they haven't gotten intimate with someone, let alone even getting into a relationship. So yes, it can be a little bit annoying because there is quite the learning curve, and honestly, I'm one of the biggest proponents of getting to a relationship fairly early on as an adult. And from your first relationship or relationships, you can fuck up, you can learn, and you can determine the kind of partner that you'd want to be with and the kind of person that you want to be in a relationship, so that by the time you're getting to a point where you want to settle down, you're a lot better off than a lot of other people, or at least you're a lot better off as an individual. Now, don't get me wrong, there are exceptions to this, like, hoeing around. Like, if a shorty starts hoeing around at the age of 16, it doesn't mean that she'll be a much better hoe at the age of 26. Like, that in and of itself is not something that I preach for. But you do notice that a lot of people that got into fairly long-lasting or fairly long-term relationships at a very young age, they tend to have much healthier relationships, or at least much healthier relationship practices whenever they get into relationships later on. Because you'll find that the chances of them getting into some version of a hoe phase or fucking around when they're single is probably a lot lower, because they are not prioritizing sex like a lot of other people are. They tend to have a preference for a certain amount of emotional attachment, which is very important and very good in terms of relationships. And more often than not, you'll actually find that they will end up settling down and possibly even getting married probably sooner than a lot of other people that, try to get into relationships a lot later would do. Because for them, they pretty much got into relationships when they were young, and it was a lot more about the emotion then. So caring for your partner, caring about how they feel, is something that came almost as like a primary core function for a lot of these people when they got into relationships. Now, don't get me wrong, I might be just spitting a bunch of shit out of my ass here, because it's not like I had a relationship at like the age of 16. But you find that there's a lot of people that, they get into a relationship from a very young age, and they have or maintain that relationship for a pretty good amount of time. By the time they leave that relationship and they move on to another one, they want something that's just as solid, if not more solid. So they will pick up some very good relationship habits, which they can implement in their next relationships. And also, for a fact that there's a very good chance that they'll be a very solid partner. Not unless if the other partner was busy eating a bunch of shit just to stay in the relationship. If they had a pretty good relationship, then there's a pretty good chance that that person will be a very solid partner. But when you have someone coming in to start learning a lot later, after they have a bunch of life that's going through them, so the priorities are very different, you find that it becomes harder to focus on the emotional, because on one end there's someone that's trying to come through the financial side. On the other hand, there's someone that's trying to come through on the social side. On the other hand, there's someone that's also trying to come through on like the mental side, or like even the professional or the career side. And all of those bits working hand in hand, if you don't have the emotional side kind of like on lock, you find that it becomes very easy for you to get thrown into a not so good relationship where someone doesn't really care for you, but because they do a bunch of things okay, you're like, they're not a bad person. Yet they might be emotionally manipulative, they might be narcissistic, they might not treat you well, but because they are quote-unquote provider type, or because they treat you a certain way at home and they're good homemakers, you're suddenly like, they treat me like shit emotionally, but because they do pretty well on these other things, then the emotional side isn't all that important. Yet the truth of it is, it's about as important as a bunch of these other things. But then again, I could be wrong about this shit, just the same I could be wrong about a bunch of other things, but I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our very next tweet of this episode, which was written by a woman who said, and I quote, "It's funny how married men think their wives sleep with them only," end quote. Okay, now I have said this before and I'm going to say this again. Granted, this isn't a Kenyan woman, but I feel like at this point you could even open up the boundaries to beyond just Kenyans and say that we have an infidelity problem. I did an entire episode on this, and I was talking about how we have an infidelity problem where we believe that everyone out there is cheating and it is not good for us in any way, shape or form. Now, truth of it is, there's a lot of people out there that are cheating. There's a lot of people who are married that are cheating, both men and women. And yes, there are a lot of married men who think that their wives sleep with them alone, even though these guys are trying to sleep with their wives maybe like once or twice a month. But with that said, does it mean that all married women actually cheat on their spouses? No, not really. There's a lot of them that do, but there's actually quite a number of married women that do not even imagine cheating on their partner, whether or not they're being treated well in that relationship. So to come up and say that, it's funny how married men think their wives sleep with them only, it's almost like saying that married women cheat, which isn't entirely the case, because yes, even though there are some who cheat, it doesn't mean that all of them do. And the belief that everyone is cheating, or married men are cheating, married women are cheating, is a bad belief, because it almost kind of justifies people who might be in an unhappy relationship or an unhappy partnership or even marriage to suddenly think, I can go out there and do it because I'm not the only one. And there's a lot of people that do that. There's a lot of people that will cheat today, not because they had that drive and they decided to do it, but because they know that probably their friends are cheating on their partners and they seem to be okay. No one's found out. or they probably know people around them that are doing it and it seems to be okay and people aren't raising any alarms about it, or they just hear about it so much that it sounds normal to them that they're like, you know what, everyone cheats, what's wrong if I do it as well? And that is where my issue with everything is, because this belief that everyone out there is cheating is not a good belief, because it almost justifies to people who are cheating that it's okay because everyone's doing it, and to those who aren't doing it but might be considering it, it almost kind of justifies them getting into it because guess what, everyone is doing it. Although, then again, someone has come out and told me that I'm a little too anal about this shit, so I should leave it alone, so I am going to leave it at that and move on to another tweet that is actually very related to this, which was also written by a woman who said, and I quote, "Question of the day, can a man actually tell when his woman has made love with another man?" End quote. Okay, can a man tell that his woman has made love with another man or made love to another man? Yes, it is possible. Can implying possibility? Yes, it is possible to figure that out. But do a lot of men actually know, or at least are there a lot of men that figure that out? No, not really. And it's mainly because of how we focus on information versus how women focus on information. Because a lot of people usually talk about how, women have a sixth sense and, women will find out if you're cheating super quickly, but men don't. And the main reason why that happens mainly comes down to the fact that women will focus on details way more than men do, and men will focus on what I'd like to call highlights. Like, you'll find that guys won't obsess over certain details that, women might find to be particularly important, and that will sort of leave them in the dark when it comes to certain things that they could pick up about their woman possibly sleeping with another man. Women, on the other hand, will focus on certain details about guys that will make it easier for them to be spotted if they do start sleeping with another woman. Like, I remember hearing of a story of a guy who was banging another chick, and he had sort of started having a thing with this other babe, and he thought that he was doing it under the radar, but the wife became suspicious because, and I kid you the hell not, he was fucking her differently. Like, she noticed that the way the guy had been giving it to her was different in terms of how the guy was angling himself and he was doing the do, as opposed to how he had been doing it before for a bunch of different years. So she found that shit a little bit sus and suddenly raised an alarm. Now, that is probably the more extreme version of it, but it's not like it's uncommon for women to pick up on certain details like that. Guys, on the other hand, may not pick up something like that. Shorty riding you, she's probably riding you the same whether she's screwing you or a different guy. You probably might not pick up on that shit. And there's definitely other things that you might not pick up because you as a guy are not wired to look for those details, because you don't even know what details to look for in case your partner is cheating on you. And especially if you're having your own affair on the side and you're just hoping your babe then find out, it's probably even harder for you to even consider or possibly find out that your partner is cheating on you. Just saying. But with that said, there are guys that have been able to catch their babes actually in the act. There are guys that have found out that their babes are cheating on them, and that's because they actually pay attention to their women. They pay attention to details in ways that a lot of other guys probably don't. I actually know of a guy that found out that his babe was cheating, and dude just came out and he was like, yo guys, I know my babe is cheating on me. We asked for proof, and people were like, oh, so how exactly do you know? And the guy was like, I don't have the proof. It's not like there's anything that I picked up on that I know of, but I honestly just feel that this babe is actually cheating on me. And I kid you the hell not. For most people, whenever they say that they sense that their partner is cheating on them, it's because there's details that they've picked up that even they don't know that they've picked up. And interestingly enough, after confronting the issue for, I think it was probably about a week, dude actually found out, and the babe actually did come out herself and say that she was cheating on dude. And honestly, you wouldn't think that guys would pick up on that. People usually make it seem as though guys can't find out if their woman is cheating, not unless if they decide to be sloppy or they decide to give it up themselves and let the guy find out. But the reality of it is, people can find out if the other person is cheating if they're really good at spotting certain details. And if you pay attention to your partner a lot, you could probably spot some of those details. Does it mean that everyone can figure it out? No. There's people whose partners have been cheating on them since before they were married, even when they were married. Hell, their kids probably aren't even theirs. But these guys will probably never even know or even find out that their partner is cheating on them because they haven't picked up on those details for all of the years that they've been together. And hell, probably some of those details might be off, but for them, that is probably what's normal for them, so they won't really investigate further. But to answer the question, can men find out if their women is cheating on them or not? Well, yes, men can find out. We don't do it very often, although we are learning how to do it a lot better these days. But yeah, we can find out if our women are actually cheating on us. Although, then again, like I said, there's a lot of guys that are very clueless or just aren't paying attention. So if they hear this shit, they'll just be like, nigga, you are capping and you do not know what the fuck you're saying. If a babe wants to cheat on you, you will not find out shit. And maybe I'm wrong about this shit, or maybe I'm right. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. And on IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end. Episode 500 is what's coming up next. And I do have something very important that I want to share with you all there. But up until we get to that episode, I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.